Hi, I'm Jim Spina. I'm a nuclear physicist, a recovered alcoholic, and the author of a best-selling book. And I want to talk to you today about the expanding universe. For many, many years, after astrophysicists came up with the theory of the Big Bang as the origin of the universe, small little re-encapsulation for you, the current prevalent held theory within common accepted astrophysicists is that a Big Bang occurred about 14 to 15 billion years ago. And that was a massive explosion of energy, which, according to Einstein's E equals mc squared, transformed itself into matter, which spawned the dawn of the universe that we live in over the past 14.5 billion years, give or take. We've learned a lot about the universe since then. And geniuses like Einstein and Stephen Hawking have learned so much about stars and black holes and gravity and space timelines. But up until recently being about 10 years ago, the theory was that the universe was expanding. Because if you think about it, if it started from an explosion, it's going to explode outward and expand. But it is expanding at a slowing rate. It's decelerating. And the reason is that's because the mass that was created is at the center of this expansive universe. And mass possesses gravity, so there's a gravitational pull pulling on the ring, the periphery, the boundaries of this universe. So it's expanding at a decelerating rate, or its expansion is slowing. And a lot of the physics, the theories, well, actually all of them were based upon that theory. And actually, it's difficult to tell. That's just intuitive. It would be counterintuitive to think otherwise. How could it not be expanding at a decelerating rate with all that gravity? But it's very difficult to determine. It's very difficult to determine. But some bright people figured out a way to do it. There's a certain type of star, and they're called white novas, and it's actually a particular type of white nova stars. When these white stars supernova, like all stars, they give off an energy spectrum. What's unique about the supernova of these particular white stars is that they all supernova at the exact same energy level. Why is that important? Because it gives you a baseline. So if we could theoretically look at two type A4 white supernovas some distance apart in the universe, knowing that they give off spectra of the same energy, we could look at them over time and see what's happening to the distance between the one furthest away from us compared to the one closer to us. We can actually measure the expansion of the universe, and in fact we did. And as usual, in physics, when somebody has a stroke of genius, it leads us to believe that something that we've always believed can't be true. The universe is in fact expanding from the Big Bang, but it is expanding at an accelerating rate. Yeah, it's counterintuitive. Like a lot of physics is counterintuitive. Which means that it's expanding outwards at an accelerating rate. The rate that it is expanding outward, its rate of growth is accelerating. It's accelerating. It's getting bigger, quicker all the time. It'll get bigger, quicker tomorrow than it's getting bigger now. And that's going to continue on infinitely. Now we had a problem. What could be causing that? We had no idea. And I have to say, while we're starting perhaps to put some labels and boundaries on it, like all things in physics, as nature teaches itself to us, there's a lot left to know. Have you ever heard of dark energy? Yeah, that's where it came from. The birth or genesis of dark energy was the astrophysicists assembled themselves and said, there has to be an energy that's pulling on the universe, causing its expansion to counteract and overcome the gravitational force that's trying to contract it. And there's been a lot that's been, a number of textbooks still have to be changed. When we talk about that in relationship to what it teaches us about ourselves, I don't believe in a hard marrying the laws of physics to the laws of spirituality or the laws of humanity. But I do think there are tremendous metaphors that exist between the two. And if we learn about what's happening in the universe with respect to the universal laws, it teaches us something about all the universal laws. There's spiritual laws, and there's physical laws, and there's laws that govern energy. So the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate. Well, I think our purpose on life here is learning and growth. I don't think our purpose in life is the conquest of our personal happiness. I think our life is about our learning and our growth. Now, our happiness can and should be one of the outcomes of that process. But growth, that means we're supposed to expand. That's our destiny. That's our purpose. I want to ask you, are we always as people expanding? If you could agree with me that at least in part we're certainly about learning and growth in our life, how would we know? I want to propose to you that there's some things you could look at to tell you whether you're contracting or expanding. And I like to look at it by starting at the beginning. Think of it as it does with the universe. The expansion started from an infinitesimally small point in space called a discontinuity. Very, very, very tiny. The Big Bang occurred, and the expansion occurred when it's accelerating outwards. So, at our birth, we start to expand as human beings, physically, mentally, and spiritually. But what happens when we die? Isn't that a contraction process in many different ways? Sure, you could view death as a contraction process. It may, in fact, as it does in the universe, give genesis to new life. So, if I was growing spiritually, mentally, and physically, expanding like the universe that I'm living in, I'd be in resonance with it. I would be happy. I'd be grateful. I'd be benevolent. I would wish well on others. I would be kind. I would be charitable. All these things that we call virtues would be signs of expansion, because if you look at people that display those characteristics, they're growing. Interestingly enough, they did a study on people that lived to be over 100 years old. And this was an extensive study done by several leading universities, and they looked for things when they interviewed these folks that were in common. And the things that they had in common were the things that I just told you about. They looked at their life as expansive. They accepted change as a part of life. They felt that gratitude stimulated their growth, that it was appropriate to be kind, benevolent, caring, and loving, because it led towards a more fulfilling, healthy, long, prosperous life. And in fact, it did. And that wasn't just true like 51% of the time, it was almost universally true. What I'm proposing is that maybe we do a self-inventory and we look for, well, what would the signs of contraction be? Well, how about pessimism, ingratitude, resentment, anger, hatred, closed-mindedness? That's a big one. Narrow-mindedness leads to dogma, and that leads to your contraction and the contraction of other people. Open-mindedness leads to expansion, the collaboration and connectivity between ideas. Look at those characteristics, just do a little profile, then say, how was I 10 years ago? Which of these characteristics was I displaying predominantly? And how am I doing now? Am I growing alongst with the universe that I'm in? at an expanding rate, or have I started to contract? And what happened in my life that caused me to contract? Everybody's life has tremendous loss in it. Everybody's life. Everybody sees death of a loved one. Everybody sees other horrific losses, things that personally cause trauma. Trauma is inevitable in this human life. Trauma causes loss, and it can either be the inception point for contraction, or it can be the inception point for learning and growth. And I'm willing to bet, and I've done it in my life, if you take a look and do your own inventory, if you find that you've started to contract, you can associate it with a trauma in your life that you didn't recover from. Or perhaps if somehow you have found yourself at an accelerating rate of expansion, you have learned from the trauma and used it to grow. A psychiatrist, a Viennese psychiatrist, well known, once said that he'd studied all of his cases, and one thing he concluded was that there was no change without loss, and there's no growth without change. Einstein said that had he not been able to learn from his mistakes, he would not have been able to learn anything. Edison tried different filaments for the light bulb over 1,000 times before the one that worked. The ability to learn from our mistakes and move forward from trauma, which is inevitable in our lives, is key to our expansion. I think it was probably pretty traumatic for the universe when the Big Bang occurred. Somehow it got over itself, though, and it's expanding. Thanks for sharing this moment with me.